The soft glow of the afternoon light spread across the park, casting its warmth upon the rustling leaves of the trees, creating long shadows that stretched and curved along the winding, rugged path. A peaceful atmosphere enveloped the space, with the faint sounds of children laughing on the playground mixing with the melodic chirps of birds perched on nearby branches. But for Lena Fox, everything felt like a thin, fragile shell, easily shattered. She sat alone on a bench, her posture relaxed, clutching a black leather bag. Dressed in simple athletic gear, a gray t-shirt and faded jeans, her body revealed a strong, sturdy physique under the gentle sunlight. Her long brown hair was neatly tied behind her, and her skin bore the healthy glow of someone who had faced countless brutal battles during her time in the Navy SEALs. A faint scar on her right arm was a reminder of those unforgettable days, moments when she threw herself into fierce confrontations in distant lands, where she had come face to face with the deadliest of threats. Lena had left the military, retired after years of service to her country. But the instincts of a warrior, something she could never shake, remained as sharp as blades slicing through the air. That's why she always felt alert, even in moments that seemed serene like this one. And today was no different. Even while sipping coffee and appearing relaxed, her eyes never stopped scanning the surroundings. Her gaze swept over the joggers and walkers, their faces glowing with smiles. But no, she wouldn't be deceived. She saw a man passing by, his manner strange. He was middle-aged, wearing tight, athletic clothes, walking with a slight limp, his eyes darting to the side, constantly glancing around, never making direct eye contact. A look full of suspicion. Lena wasn't naive. She knew something was off. She kept observing, but there was no immediate sign of danger. Then, something shifted in the air. A sudden feeling caused her to focus even more. A group of men was slowly approaching from the opposite side, but Lena didn't initially feel anything unusual. They wandered casually in the park, as if nothing was amiss. But no one could fool her sharp eyes. The group of four men, led by Zane, a tall figure with cold eyes, seemed to have a plan in mind. Lena could feel their gaze directed at her. Not a casual glance, but a calculated observation. She didn't need to turn around to know they had noticed her. Their strides had slowed, as though they were preparing for something. Lena stood from the bench, maintaining an outward calm, but her mind was already prepared for any scenario. The men's footsteps grew louder, and she could feel the change in the atmosphere, a wave of unease emanating from them. Zane didn't look at her like a normal passerby. He looked at her like a predator spotting its prey, waiting for the right moment to strike. Low murmurs between them reached Lena's ears. Unclear, but enough for her to sense they were discussing something. She picked up her leather bag and lightly placed it on her shoulder. Her left foot took a step back, creating space between herself and the approaching group. What she hadn't anticipated, however, was that, although the group was moving stealthily, they were in no rush or panic. They wanted a confrontation, not a quiet encounter. Zane stepped forward, a smirk playing on his lips, and said with derision, "Hello, lady. You really shouldn't be sitting here alone." To anyone else, it might have seemed like a casual greeting, but to Lena, it was a clear threat. Lena didn't rush to respond. She stood still, her voice calm as she kept her eyes on Zane. "I'm just resting. I don't want any trouble." But inside, every word Zane spoke felt like stones being thrown into a calm pond, creating ripples. She knew this confrontation was unavoidable, and it would unfold in a way she couldn't fully control. Zane continued to approach, his hand slipping into his coat pocket. Behind him, his subordinates, Ben, Max Lee, and Cole Stark, stood confidently, their faces full of arrogance, but their eyes betrayed a simmering anger and judgment. As they got closer, Lena could feel their steps, no longer those of men looking for a casual chat, but of men prepared to attack. Zane grinned, his voice ringing out. You seem to think you own this place, sitting here like you own the whole park. Lena's expression remained unchanged, but in her mind, she was calculating their every move, evaluating every gesture, every position. She noticed the overconfidence in their movements. These men had never faced anyone stronger than them. They only confronted easy targets. This was a challenge, but Lena could feel every detail of the situation unfolding. These four men didn't realize they had encountered an opponent who had never been defeated, even in the most brutal of battles. Calmly, Lena said, "This is a public place, and I'm not your target." But as Zane closed the distance, Lena didn't need to do much. A slight movement, a swift punch, and Zane was immediately down. Max and Ben didn't even have time to react before she was upon them, knocking them to the ground. In that moment, she was no longer a woman casually resting in a park. She was a warrior, ready to take down anyone who meant her harm. But she didn't stop there. While the other two were still reeling, unsure of what to do, Lena quickly pivoted and moved away from the area, relaxing her arm. But inside, the storm was just beginning. These men wouldn't stop here, and Lena knew she had just stepped into a much bigger fight. In an instant, the calm of the park had vanished. It was the first step in a long journey Lena had to face. A journey not only to protect herself, but also to expose the dark truth that loomed over this community. Lena Fox stood alone before the fogged glass door of a small cafe, a place where one could find a bit of peace amidst the city's hustle and bustle. Gray clouds loomed overhead, signaling an impending storm. Yet, the silence was only superficial. She inhaled deeply, feeling the breeze before stepping inside. Nothing new, just another peaceful afternoon passing by. But inside, something was stirring. Questions about the group of men in the park still haunted her. Lena pulled out her phone, opening a message from Emma Gray, the journalist she had met just days earlier. The message was brief, but enough to make her realize that she wasn't the only one keeping an eye on this criminal group. Emma had started investigating Eric Frost, the man Lena felt was deeply connected to the attack by the group. The preliminary information Emma had gathered about Frost revealed not just a businessman, but someone who might be orchestrating racist groups in the city. His activities seemed to be just the tip of the iceberg. Lena didn't hesitate. She replied to the message, arranging to meet Emma at a safe location. She knew she couldn't tackle this alone. She needed someone with an understanding of social networks, someone who could dig up information that was otherwise out of her reach. And Emma was that person. As Lena entered the cafe, her eyes quickly found Emma sitting in a corner, her gaze fixed on the computer screen, fingers typing quickly as though searching for something important. She didn't look like an ordinary journalist. She resembled a detective, sharp and determined. "What have you found on Eric Frost?" Lena asked as she sat down, not wasting words. She knew in this line of work, idle chatter only wasted time. Emma looked up, her dark eyes meeting Lena's with an intense focus. "He's not a normal businessman. His facade is too perfect, but the signs I've found, I believe he's behind a complex network. Racist groups aren't new to him. He has a way of controlling everything subtly, from funding them to laundering money through his companies." Lena wasn't surprised. She had suspected as much since facing the group in the park, but proving it was a whole different challenge. "Is there anything specific?" Lena's voice was firm, serious. Emma nodded, pulling out a stack of documents. "I found some paperwork showing shady transactions through Frost construction companies. He uses community projects as a cover. Behind that, the money flows to these groups. It's not just about spreading hate speech. He's using that money to further extremist political goals." Lena frowned as she scrutinized the documents Emma handed her. What's the next step? Emma paused, glancing over her notes. What I just showed you is just the tip of the iceberg. But we need to find the direct links, the people in Frost's organization. If we can access those within his network, we might uncover stronger evidence. Lena nodded. I'll start with Zane's group. They seem to be Frost's enforcers. I need to learn more about them. Emma sighed, tapping the table lightly. Be careful. People like Zane aren't easy to expose. They probably have their own protection network. But if you're determined, I'll help. Lena stood up, her gaze resolute. I can't back down. What I saw today is just the beginning. Frost must be brought into the light. With that resolve, Lena began her journey to uncover the truth. But just before leaving the cafe, her phone buzzed again. A new message from Rosa, the police officer Lena had met earlier. The message was brief, but carried an important piece of information. I have intel on a warehouse. It might be where Zane's group is hiding. I'll need your help. Lena looked at the message, her eyes lighting up. A warehouse. This could be where the clues leading to Frost were waiting. Without hesitation, she replied and immediately set out, preparing for an important operation. Before heading out, she took a deep breath, savoring the calm around her. It was a peaceful moment, but within her, a storm was brewing. What Lena would face next wasn't just a fight against criminals. It was a battle to expose the darkness overshadowing the society. The darkness of racism and the dangerous conspiracies no one knew about. And Lena, with her perseverance and the instincts of a warrior, would not stop until the truth was revealed. Lena stepped outside, feeling as though everything around her had blurred. People bustled around her, but for her, the world had become nothing but the shadows she had to confront. The battle was only beginning, and the first target was Zane's warehouse. Lena stood in the shadows outside the warehouse, her breath merging with the cool night air. The industrial complex was eerily silent, only the sound of the wind sweeping through the old buildings, rusted walls, and desolate streets breaking the stillness. It was the perfect place for criminals to hide, but for Lena, it was where she would expose the dark secrets she had been relentlessly chasing. A chill ran through her, but it wasn't fear. It was the feeling of preparation, a readiness for a battle she knew wouldn't be easy. The warehouse before her, a large building that seemed to have been long neglected, was marked with shattered windows and rusted doors, signs of a place where sinister plots could easily take root. She peered through a broken window, observing the shadows moving inside. Lena knew she couldn't go in alone without support, so she had called Rosa, the police officer she trusted, to accompany her. Everything had to be perfect, every decision meticulously calculated. Rosa arrived moments later, her police car pulling up to the curb. Lena watched her step out of the vehicle, the steady gait of a seasoned officer. Rosa's brown hair was tied neatly in a scarf, her face determined. She walked toward Lena, exchanging a silent understanding with her. No words necessary. Both knew that this wasn't just another routine operation. This was a raid into the heart of the conspiracy that Eric Frost and his associates had been hiding for so long. Zane's whole crew is in there. I don't see anyone in our team who could approach without risks, Lena said, her voice firm but tinged with a hint of tension. She had always been aware of the risks, but this was different. These men weren't easily fooled, and they might have a formidable security detail. Rosa glanced into the warehouse through the broken window and then turned to Lena, nodding. Are you sure? We can call for backup. I don't want this situation to spiral out of control. Lena paused for a moment, weighing her options. Yes, she could call for backup, but she didn't want innocent people to be dragged into this. What she needed now was precision, and no one could handle it better than her. No, we'll do this alone, Lena replied, her eyes steady. I'll go in first, draw their attention so they open the door. You slip inside and support me from within. Rosa raised an eyebrow, but understood Lena's resolve. Be careful. Lena nodded, her nerves taut, but her focus absolute as she walked toward the front door of the warehouse. She had carried out countless operations like this before, but this time felt different. Eric Frost wasn't just any criminal. He was behind a network of racially motivated crime, and Lena's mission wasn't just to take down a criminal. It was to dismantle the entire system he had built in the shadows. As Lena entered the warehouse, the sound of her footsteps echoed through the vast, empty space. The men inside turned at the noise, seeing a lone woman walk in, carrying a handbag, exuding confidence. They didn't realize they were facing a warrior. Zane was the first to approach Lena, his eyes lighting up, his hands subtly reaching forward, as if trying to control the situation. Who are you looking for? Zane sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. Lena didn't respond. She simply reached into her bag, pulling out her phone. This ends here. If you want to keep going, I'll call for backup, she said, her voice cold and unyielding. Zane said nothing. He realized the situation had shifted. At that moment, Lena dialed a number on her phone. It was the signal for Rosa to enter the warehouse. Rosa quietly opened the back door and slipped inside, immediately trailing behind the targets. Just as planned, Zane and his crew were unprepared. They had assumed that only Lena had walked into their trap. Zane continued to approach Lena, but now there was something different in his gaze. Something had changed. She was no longer the simple woman from the park the day before. Lena had become a real adversary. Meanwhile, Rosa had taken her position, and in a tense moment, Lena gave her the signal. The sound of a door creaking open echoed through the space. Zane's henchmen slowly started moving toward the door, but they no longer had the same confidence as before. They realized they were being cornered. Lena stared at Zane with eyes as sharp as knives, as if she were peering into his very soul. Today is the day your mask falls, she said, her tone frosty but resolute. Zane froze, a flicker of worry in his eyes. He knew things were no longer simple. His loyal henchmen, once so sure of themselves, were now losing their composure. At that moment, Ben, one of Zane's henchmen, stood up, his face panic-stricken. Zane, we need to leave now. The cops are here, Ben shouted, his voice filled with panic. Zane looked around, realizing the raid had failed. His henchmen began to fumble, but they still tried to maintain their calm. Zane turned to Lena one last time, and then, like a cornered animal, ordered his men to retreat. This is just the beginning, Zane growled, turning to flee. But Lena was ready. She moved swiftly, as fast as a gust of wind, shoving him into the wall. The whole group was trapped, unable to escape Lena's pursuit. Rosa was there in time to assist, apprehending Zane's henchmen. When the chaos finally settled, Lena stood before Zane, letting out a relieved sigh. But there was one thing she couldn't stop thinking about. This was just the beginning. Zane's mask had fallen, but the shadows still hid other secrets in society. Leaving the warehouse, Lena and Rosa began planning their next steps. We won't just take down these pawns, Lena thought. We need to dismantle the entire system behind them. And the next target is Eric Frost. Lena smiled lightly, a subtle grin of victory, but she knew that this was just a small win. The war was far from over. The sun had long set, leaving only the faintest traces of light across the sky, blending with the flickering streetlights. Lena stood on the bridge, gazing down at the river that flowed through the city. The scene around her was nothing special, but for her, every evening like this held significant meaning. It was the moment when everything became still, the time for her to center herself and prepare for the next steps in an ongoing fight. Since Zane and his group had been captured, everything seemed to be nearing its end. But Lena knew that it was only a temporary victory. Eric Frost, the man behind all the schemes, was still free. He wasn't just the mastermind of a criminal network. He was also the one pulling the strings of extremist groups that were eroding the very foundation of society. And now, Lena knew that she could not back down. She looked down at the phone in her hand, a message from Emma flashing across the screen. There's new information about Frost. He's starting to act again. The brief words, though simple, were impossible to ignore. Lena knew that Eric Frost wasn't the type to go down quietly. He wasn't the kind of man who would stay silent after being raided, especially when the forces behind him were still very much active. She couldn't afford to be reactive. Lena slowly set her phone down and turned to look at the distant cityscape, where tall buildings loomed like ghosts reaching toward the sky. She thought about everything that had transpired throughout this journey. From the first steps when she began questioning Eric Frost, to the raid on the warehouse, and the clues that had been uncovered. It was more than just a physical battle. It was a fight for the truth, for what had been hidden. The awakening for Lena didn't just come after she defeated Zane and his crew. It came in a moment of silence when she realized that she wasn't just facing criminals. She was up against a system where people like Frost could thrive and manipulate, using division and hatred to control. Lena's gaze had sharpened more than ever. Everything she had been through, the struggles, the wounds she had endured over the years, were no longer just memories. They were motivation. Motivation not just to protect herself, but to protect the innocent, those who couldn't defend themselves. Lena was no longer just a lone warrior. She was the embodiment of justice. She turned and walked toward the car parked by the side of the road. Rosa was waiting inside, looking at her with sharp eyes. There were no greetings, just a knowing nod between them. Neither of them needed to say much. They both knew this trip was no longer just a reconnaissance mission. It was an operation, and the target was Eric Frost. "We need to get inside," Lena said, her voice calm but full of determination. "We can't let him keep operating. He needs to be brought to light." Rosa didn't argue, but furrowed her brows, her voice dropping low. "He's dangerous. It's not just him, but the forces behind him. Be careful, Lena. This network is bigger than we think." "It doesn't matter," Lena replied, her gaze cold and resolute. "We can't stop now." The car turned onto a quiet, deserted road. The sound of the tires rolling on the pavement made the atmosphere feel even heavier. Rosa pulled out her phone, starting to sift through the information about Frost, the documents she had gathered from previous investigations. Meanwhile, Lena sat in silence, her eyes fixed on the world outside the window, her mind swirling with fragmented thoughts. As they neared an area on the outskirts of the city, where, according to Emma, Frost might be hiding, Lena could feel the tension in the air. They had prepared for this moment, but there was still a sense of unease. This wasn't just a simple raid. This was a manhunt for a dangerous criminal, a man who had been in hiding for far too long. Stopping the car on the side of the road, they observed from a distance a warehouse surrounded by barbed wire and patrolling guards. Frost wasn't a fool. He knew how to hide, using sophisticated methods to shield himself from the police's detection. However, Lena knew this wouldn't stop her. "We can't go in through the main gate," Lena said, pointing at the shadows of the guards. "The only way is to find another route." Rosa nodded, pulling out a set of papers. "I've found a side entrance. There's a back door that isn't as heavily guarded. But we need to move fast." Lena didn't say anything else. She got out of the car, following Rosa toward the side door. Every step she took was filled with confidence, each movement meticulously planned. She knew that everything had to go perfectly. There could be no mistakes. They moved like shadows, making no sound. Lena led the way, her eyes scanning every movement around them. When they reached the side door, Rosa quickly checked the lock, and within seconds, the door opened. Inside, Lena could feel the stifling atmosphere of the room. The dim lights and cold air enveloped them. They couldn't afford to waste time. Each step was cautious, but Lena couldn't shake the feeling that they were getting closer to the truth she had been searching for. And then they found what they needed. In a small room, piles of classified documents were stacked. Photographs, maps, bank accounts meticulously recorded. These were the pieces of evidence that exposed the truth behind Eric Frost. A money laundering operation, a network of support from extremist organizations, and most importantly, the names that Lena had been looking for. She looked at the documents, her hand trembling slightly, but still maintaining composure. "We have enough evidence now, Rosa," she said, her voice calm but firm. "We'll bring him into the light." However, no matter how well prepared they were, Lena knew that she had never been in an easy situation. Frost wouldn't let this happen without a fight, and Lena understood that the road ahead would not be smooth. But this time, she wasn't afraid anymore. This wasn't just one person's fight. It was the fight of all those oppressed, of all those who had endured cruelty and racism. As they walked out of the warehouse, carrying the crucial evidence, Lena knew that the next step would be a decisive one. There was no turning back. She would fight until the truth was fully revealed, and Eric Frost would pay for the crimes he had committed. The sun had just begun to rise on the horizon, but Lena did not let the morning light distract her. She stood amidst the crowd, a crowd gathered for a trial she knew would change everything. Her heavy footsteps echoed in the quiet hallway of the courthouse, the tension spreading from her shoulders. Something invisible, yet undeniably clear weighed on her heart, quickening her pulse every time she thought about the upcoming trial. Everything had come to this, a struggle not only of hers, but for all the victims left in the shadows. Today was the day Eric Frost, the man behind a network of racist criminal activity, would stand trial. For Lena, this was not just a case. It was an uncompromising battle against apathy and cruelty. And she, once a warrior, now stood on the battleground of justice, tasked with bringing the truth to light, no matter the cost. Lena walked down the courthouse hallway, her eyes fixed on the courtroom door. The anxiety never left her, but the months in the military had honed her ability to mask it. Each step radiated unwavering confidence. Nothing could shake her now. The raids, the life-or-death battles in the past, paled in comparison to what she was about to face today. Entering the courtroom, Lena felt the eyes of the entire crowd on her. Lawyers, witnesses, and reporters filled the room. She didn't care about their stares. She knew they were watching, but today wasn't about them. Today was about justice. Eric Frost sat at the front of the courtroom, his face cold and motionless. He had prepared for this day meticulously, everything arranged for him to escape punishment. The expensive lawyers he hired, all ready to fight to protect him. He was a man of wealth, of power, and he didn't believe anyone could defeat him. But Lena had seen many who thought they were untouchable. And Frost, no matter how powerful, was no exception. Across the room, Rosa sat with the investigation team, her eyes never leaving the developments in the courtroom. She didn't speak, only giving Lena a glance full of sympathy and support. Behind Rosa's soft smile, Lena recognized the steadfastness of a companion she trusted. They had fought together to bring Zane and his crew into the light. Now they were facing Frost, the final obstacle. The trial began, and Frost sat there listening to the charges against him. He was accused not only of engaging in criminal activities, but also of financing racist groups, providing resources to help them continue their hateful actions. Each accusation felt like a hammer strike against him, but Frost remained unmoved. He sat still, his face cold, as though nothing could shatter his confidence. Lena sat down, listening intently. Every piece of evidence she had collected, every investigation they had conducted, was presented in the courtroom. The documents Emma had provided, the records from the warehouse raid, the money laundering transactions, and even Zane's testimony had become undeniable evidence. Whispers filled the room as Frost's lawyers began to refute the charges, trying to break down each piece of evidence. They had no shortage of tactics. They attempted to argue that the evidence wasn't clear enough, that Zane's testimony was the word of a criminal with motives to lie. But no one in the room could deny the documents Lena had brought. No one could break the strong evidence. No one could erase what had been exposed. Lena felt a challenge rising within her. Every word spoken by Frost's lawyers was designed to diminish the value of the truth, but she couldn't let that happen. Anger surged within her, but she kept a calm demeanor. Today was the day of judgment, and she had to stand firm. When it was Lena's turn to speak, she didn't rush. She didn't need to shout, didn't need to make a scene. She only needed to present the truth. She stepped up to the podium, her piercing gaze sweeping over everyone in the room. She had prepared for this moment, and now it was time to make a powerful statement. Eric Frost, Lena began, her voice cold yet clear. You are not just the man who funded racist groups. You are the one who nurtured and built a criminal network where hatred is used as a tool to control and manipulate innocent people. What you have done is not just a crime against those you've deceived, but a crime against the very society you live in. She paused for a moment, allowing her words to sink in. Every eye in the room was focused on her. No one could ignore the confidence and strength in her words. She wasn't just speaking about Frost. She was speaking about the pain he had caused society, about the people he had exploited. With this evidence, with the cooperation of those who stood up against you, we can clearly see your true nature. You are a liar, the architect of a world where innocent people live in fear. But today, the truth will not be hidden. You will pay for what you have done. Lena didn't need to say more. Her words were enough for everyone in the courtroom to understand. Then, she sat down, her eyes never leaving Frost, leaving him to face the verdict he couldn't deny. The verdict came shortly after. The judges sentenced Eric Frost on all charges. He was given a life sentence and would be held accountable for not only his crimes, but for the crimes he had enabled. When the trial ended, Lena stood up, her gaze cold but somewhat relieved. Finally, justice had been served. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew this was an important step. Frost had been taken down, but people like him were still out there. She would never stop fighting. As she walked out of the courthouse, Lena felt the light of freedom, of justice, but she also understood her work was far from over. She would continue until all the shadows were dispelled, and no one would have to live in fear anymore. The morning light faintly filtered through the windows of the room, casting light on the shadowed corners of the small house that Lena called her temporary shelter. However, within her, there was no peace, the calm usually brought by the break of a new day. Everything had just started to settle after the courtroom battle, but the fear inside her never ceased. Eric Frost had been convicted, but the names of those still lurking in his network remained hidden in the shadows, and Lena knew that this system would never surrender easily. She sat alone in the room, the desk in front of her piled with thick documents containing information about the extremist groups Frost had connected with. Audio recordings, investigations, and especially the anonymous accounts Lena had painstakingly gathered over time. Each detail was a piece of the larger puzzle that she and Rosa had worked hard to assemble. But Lena knew one key piece was still missing. It wasn't just Frost. There were the ones who created this network, the ones behind the scenes still free and out there. She sighed, her eyes glued to the computer screen. The night before, she had received a call from Emma, the journalist. You might have just found a major lead. Emma had said. Pay attention to Owen Cole. He could be the next crucial link. Owen Cole. This name had appeared in the documents long ago, but Lena had never thought he could be the one to lead her to the source of it all. But now, as everything began to unfold, she understood that Cole was an indispensable part of this network. He was the one handling finances, the one connecting people like Frost to organizations powerful enough to carry out their dark agendas. Lena had no time to rest. She stood up from the chair, grabbed her coat and wallet, preparing to leave the house. In the past few days, her steps had not been those of a solitary individual. She was fighting against the hidden forces manipulating society, and one thing she knew for sure was that Frost was not the only one in this war. Each criminal arrested was only the beginning, but bigger shadows still awaited ahead. When Lena and Rosa got in the car, the atmosphere around them felt heavy. This time, they would face something more dangerous than regular criminals. Owen Cole was not just a criminal. He was someone who could change the course of this entire battle. And Lena knew, like always, she would have to face strong resistance. They drove through the quiet streets, the streetlights flickering, casting an eerie atmosphere through the car windows. Rosa sat silently beside her, holding her phone, checking new information from the investigation team. This place looks normal, Rosa said, glancing up ahead. Just a regular cafe. But I suspect Cole's meeting someone here. Lena nodded, looking toward the small cafe ahead. The dim neon lights spilled over the streets, not bright enough to pierce the darkness that enveloped the place. She knew this was not just a place for people to casually sit and drink coffee. This was a place for transactions, a place where the darker elements of society still slithered. When Lena entered the cafe, the cold atmosphere inside made her shiver. Only a few customers sat quietly, their eyes glued to their phone screens. In the corner of the room, a man in a black suit sat across from another person, his face cold as if nothing could stir him. That was Owen Cole. He was talking to someone Lena didn't immediately recognize, but she could feel the tension in their every movement. Lena turned to Rosa, her eyes full of resolve. "We won't wait long," she whispered. "This is our opportunity." Rosa nodded, moving toward the counter. She ordered a coffee, all just a pretext to get closer to Cole without drawing attention. Lena walked over to the window, trying to overhear Cole's conversation. But with just a glance, she realized that his conversation with the other man wasn't about legitimate business or investments. It was a secret exchange, names being dropped, meetings planned, meetings that, if allowed to continue, would be catastrophic for society. As soon as Rosa returned and signaled to Lena, she understood that she had to act fast. Cole had just received a phone call, and his eyes were now full of suspicion. He had realized something was off, and not a moment could be wasted. Lena stood up and walked toward Cole's table, no longer with any doubt in her mind. Everything now was a matter of life and death, of justice and destruction. Cole was no longer just a shadow. He was here, and Lena would be the one to burn down the facade he had built. "Owen Cole," Lena began, her voice cold and unwavering. "Today, your secrets will come to light. I don't have time for this game anymore. You are part of this racist network, and it's time for you to pay for your crimes." Cole couldn't hide the shock in his eyes. He stared at Lena, as if calculating his options for resistance. But not now, not when everything was so close. Lena didn't give him time to respond. She only needed one confession, one lead on the remaining members of Frost's organization. And in Lena's gaze, Cole realized that this time, there was no escaping. He had made a mistake thinking he could survive it all. Frost might have been caught, but his network with people like Cole was still active. Lena only needed one final decision from Cole, and he stopped resisting. A full conversation began between them, and in each word from Cole, Lena heard the truth. She had found the missing piece, and all of it would lead to the collapse of the criminal network Frost and people like him had built. The entire cafe now only echoed with the soft sound of hurried footsteps, the clink of a coffee cup falling to the floor, and the darkness had been fully illuminated. Lena's fight was far from over. But today, at least one part of the darkness had been erased. She turned back to look at Rosa, and in their eyes, a silent promise was made. They would never give up. These criminals, no matter how big they were, would eventually face the consequences. In the dim light of the morning, Lena stood atop a hill, gazing toward the horizon where the city rose with strength and resilience. Below her, the city was awake, busy, and never stopping. It never left behind the people fighting their destinies. It was a city full of stories, endless journeys. And today, her path, the path she had traveled with so much pain and struggle, continued. The months past had not only been a fight against Eric Frost and the criminals behind him. She had faced many difficulties, not only physical but also mental. The scars from those battles were still fresh, but Lena knew she could not stop. She had fought to bring Frost to light, but that was just a part of a much larger battle, an ongoing fight against a silent force taking control of society. And one thing Lena knew was that if she stopped now, everything she had done would be in vain. She turned to look at the car parked by the side, where Rosa sat, her companion with understanding eyes, always by her side. No words were needed. There was a silent harmony between them. They knew that this road was not easy, without an end point, but they also knew the struggle would never be in vain. From the cases they had tackled together, they had built connections, but many pieces of the puzzle were still missing. Each time they took down a criminal, it opened new opportunities, but it was also a step further in uncovering the dark secrets they had to reveal. Rosa broke the silence. No matter how many battles we've fought, he's still out there in the dark. Frost isn't the only one. He's just a link in a vast network. What we've done so far is just the beginning. Lena looked into Rosa's eyes, recognizing the unwavering resolve and determination in them. That feeling surged through her, adding strength to her. Lena smirked, a faint but confident smile. He may have been caught, but this system can't be defeated just by raids or small victories. We'll need more than that. Even so, no one could deny that the recent victory had marked a turning point. Cole had opened up, revealing the names behind Frost's dark curtain. Lena had once stood in the shadows where secrets were never meant to be exposed, but now she could see the light at the end of the tunnel. While knowing that many challenges lay ahead, a step had already been taken. The traces of truth had been revealed, and she wouldn't stop until all the darkness was dispelled. This path had no sign of an end, and Lena didn't want it to stop. She had dedicated her life to protecting the innocent, fighting for justice. And now, that mission had become an essential part of her life. It wasn't about revenge, nor was it blind. She fought for righteousness, for the voiceless, for those abandoned by society in the dark corners of life. She understood that those behind Frost, the ones he had connected to manipulate and exploit society, would never let her be. "There's a call from Emma," Rosa said, her eyes fixed on her phone screen. "She's received information from an anonymous source. One of the extremist organizations we're investigating seems to be making some strange moves. They're preparing for something big." Lena didn't hesitate. She knew everything was interconnected. Emma had warned her about these moves long ago, and now, it wasn't just a single case anymore. This was a battle against a system that was trying to crush what was good. "Make a plan," Lena said, her voice steady, with no sign of doubt. "We're going to face what's called a full-scale war." When they arrived at the area, everything was ready. The reliable sources they had from Emma led them to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. This was where the extremist groups would gather to carry out a plan Lena couldn't ignore. Everything had reached a point where delay was no longer an option. As they entered the area, the air became tense. Just as they had anticipated, this was one of the hot spots for the extremist groups. Under the dim light of the street lamps, shadowy figures moved with precision. Lena and Rosa had no intention of infiltrating the crowd. Instead, they chose to observe, to understand the situation better and prepare for their next move. Everything can turn, Lena whispered. They're not just preparing for an action. It's an organized attack. If we fall into their plan, we'll be caught in a spiral with no way out. I agree, Rosa said. We have to be careful, but we also need to act quickly. When they got the signal from Emma, Lena knew the time had come. No more hesitation. She grabbed the gun in her hand and gestured for Rosa to prepare. Each step she took was calculated. Every caution and movement had to be perfect. The war had expanded beyond individual cases. Now it was a full-scale fight. In the dark, Lena and Rosa entered the ruined area, ready to face every challenge, no matter the cost. Their path was far from over. Everything had only just begun, and Lena, with unwavering determination, would continue to fight until justice was served. She turned back to look at the city, still awake, still moving forward. Her steps could not be undone, but Lena knew this path would lead her to the end. The path of justice, of flames that never go out. Life is not always fair. Sometimes we are forced to face dark forces, inhumane individuals who constantly try to hide the truth, manipulate, and exploit the vulnerable. But justice is not something easily attained. It is not always a glorious victory. Sometimes it comes in the form of quiet steps, difficult decisions, and relentless persistence. Like Lena and Rosa, we may not always have the strength to change everything overnight, but every small action, every simple choice can have a lasting impact. The battles they fight are not just about taking down criminals or exposing wrongdoers. They are about believing in fairness, protecting those who cannot speak for themselves, and affirming that no matter how the world changes, we can still stand firm. Each time we stumble, each challenge will only make us stronger. The darkness may cover us for a long time, but no darkness can ever block the true light of truth and resilience. And most importantly, no matter how difficult the road ahead, no matter the price we must pay, the fire of justice will never go out. Ultimately, the message of this story is a reminder that no matter how many challenges and temptations we face, we can still change the world. Not by defeating every enemy, but by holding firm to the values we fight for: justice, truth, and humanity. This path may be long and filled with hardships, but it is always worth it for those who never give up.